Hello everyone. Where we left off last was we have a grid view here with our books that you can check out. Then we were able to see the physical copies of what was being checked out. And now we're going to build on that and keep track of all the transactions that happen with these books. So following the single responsibility principle, we want to avoid putting too much information into one class. So we're going to just keep our book class very, very tight and compact, which just contains general information about the book. Then we have our library book class, which is going to look at specifically the physical copy of that book, where it goes, maybe the condition of it, other details that might come with that. And then we're going to store all this information about that book being checked out in its own table. And that'll give us access to maybe time information about the book. We're gonna keep track of the the schedule that we might plan for the book, the checkout date, the due date, the return date. So we're to record that in its own class as well, so that we are avoiding putting everything into one class. By breaking this out, this will be like its own table as well in a database. This gives us a lot more flexibility with our code. So here we have our checkout record. That's what we're going to call this table. We've built our grid view. I've initialized our grid view. I have the class here that's built. So let's go over some of the code that we have here. We have our ID column. That's just going to be our database lookup. And then this table is taking in the library book class. So what that'll be when we look at our database, that'll be our foreign key. That's how we're going to access that information about that specific book. But without getting into too much database technicalities here, let's continue with what type of information this checkout record is going to grab. Well, the first thing we want to know is when the person is checking out the book, and then when the book is due, and then when the user returns it back. So that's what our future will have. We're going to build some users for this application, but the return date versus the due date is how we know if the book is late. Then we're going to have our constructor here. The constructor is going to populate these three fields, rather, not four. Return date will get populated at a later point in time. And I think, yes, we have that set to private. We don't want that to accidentally be switched. We don't want someone going through records. By making it private, you have to have access to this direct record, and then you have to use return checkout. So this is a great time to use private to protect this piece of data, because that data is tied to an important event when the person says they've returned the book. So this is what our checkout record class is going to, the data that it's going to store. This is kind of like our base class. Remember, we don't want to put too much on top of this. We want the record to kind of have its own container, and then we're going to use this library book manager to kind of interact with the base classes that we've developed. So we have our base class, which is more or less just storing that root information, and then we're going to continue using this book manager class to interact with the base classes. This provides a lot of flexibility with our code. We can use that checkout record somewhere else in our program, or a book, or that library book. We can use it somewhere else in our program very easily without being tied down. This book manager is really focused on this GUI that we're building here. And so we can use this book manager to handle most of that functionality. So let's continue with building this checkout record. The first thing we need to do with the checkout record is you're going to see a lot of this code that we've written in the past kind of get duplicated here, right? So we got this checkout record. We're going to create another list of checkout records. We have a list here of checkout records, and it's of type checkout record. And that'll be using this class that we've created earlier. And we have this checkout record. When we reserve a book, we're going to make a historical point in time about that exact moment when they check out this book. So we're going to use some of the built-in C#.NET structs here. So this is a DateTime struct. This will allow us to pull that information about that current time on the computer and store that information. That's our checkout record. And then keeping an eye on our constructor here, the first thing we send in is that library book. So the person reserves the book. We add that book to the library books, but now we're going to interact with that book as well with our checkout record. It's going to grab that book information. It's going to set the checkout date, which is going to be this exact moment, and then it's going to say the book's due in a week, which is the due date here on our function prototype. And then we also want to add to our list here, because we're using our lists to populate our grid view here. We're going to use our list to populate our grid view, so we're going to add this specific checkout record to our checkout records list, which is going to populate our grid view. Then for return book, we have a little bit more going on. The first thing we want to do is just create a general record here, and then we're going to search. We want to search for the record that matches the book that the person has said they are returning. So for each record, we're going to loop through this list of books, and then we're going to look for that specific book that shows up in our record here. And once we find it, then we break out of the loop. But first we grab the record information. So when the book matches our record, then we're looping through this list of records. We're using the book information that the person is returning to find that record, and then we are going to say, okay, this person has returned their book, assuming we find the record. This is a little bit of error checking that's probably redundant, but we're adding it anyways. Now we're going to do the return checkout function and say it happened right now. What does that do? That says that the person has successfully returned their book. So that'll update this return date field. And that's all the functionality that we need in the library book manager. That's the large bulk of our functionality. And now we just need to get that information to appear in our user interface. So we are going to I'm going to go through this pretty quick. I already discussed what the binding source is doing, so feel free to watch the previous video if you want to look at that specific information. But everything we've done in the past, we're going to do again. We create the binding source. We create the binding source. Then we save that list to the binding source, and now we want our checkout record to be our grid view to be saved. I had it misnamed here. We're going to save the binding source to the grid view. And we want to refresh the grid view. That's the last thing I think we need to do here. Refresh the grid view so that it updates with this information. And I've also added some code that's going to say which book it is, rather than just say library book. It'll say specifically which book it is. Let's do the cell formatting. Let's do it right this time though. So I'm going to uncomment out this code. I'm going to copy this and put it into my cell formatting here. That should make it work correctly this time. And that's all the code we need. Let's check out our program, see if everything runs as we are hoping, see if it runs as intended. So we reserve a book, and you can see here's the book that we reserved, and here's the exact time that we checked out the book. Same situation here. It'll get interesting though when we start to return the book. You'll see the return date. The return date is getting populated with that book now. So we can kind of see this user has 3 books checked out right now. We can see the history of the checkout record here. And right now this is specific to one user, right? It's just one user. Let's return the 1984 book. Okay. As this program grows, we're going to have it be less dependent on one user and be more flexible for many users. But right now, we're just focused on storing the checkout record of each individual copy of that book. And remember, this library, since it's this library book, this checkout record is looking at the physical copy of that book. So it is following a physical copy. This book gets returned. The physical copy of that book has just been returned. This table here is just interacting with a general list of books, and library book here is managing the specifics of each book. And we've returned Harry Potter here. Let's go ahead and return all these books and wrap up our video. So that here will conclude our quick rundown. Remember, this is just informational. This is so that you can see what the program is doing up front. Eventually, this information will be hidden from the user. We don't want them to see this information. This is for our record keeping as we're building this program. What we're going to be able to do is use these due dates to start applying maybe late fees to a user, which is a common library functionality. And these library books, we manage the physical copies. Right now, the focus will be to just present the user with the books that are available, see if they can check it out or not, and yeah, so now you get to see, you get an x-ray into how the program is going to be working. But yeah, that's all we're going to cover for this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.